button pop up, just press continue. This ensures that you know you're being recorded. We will probably have a Q&A afterwards where if you're a little shy to ask questions while being recorded, you'll have an opportunity to ask questions when you're not recorded. So everyone, good welcome this evening to our presentation of local farmers markets with Mary Ellen Burns and Joni Titherington. I'm first going to introduce Mary Ellen, and then she'll be introducing Joni later on. So Mary Ellen Burns is a food historian, author, and editor of several books on food and regional history, including Lost Restaurants of Sacramento and Their Recipes, A Taste of History, Whip Up a Cookbook, The First History of Sacramento City, and Pear Perfection. She will be taking a sabbatical from administrative duties for Renaissance so that she can finish her newest book, Extracts, mostly true stories with a sprinkling of recipes, and a cook's tour of Sacramento dive bars, which is due to the publishers in April of 2021, so very soon. Mary Ellen Burns serves on boards of the Conference of California Historical Societies, the Sacramento River Delta Historical Society, Culinary Historians of Northern California, and California Stage. It's understandable why she'd want to do a sabbatical. She is also a member of Le Damascafier here in Sacramento, or I guess in general, the Sacramento History Consortium, and is working on the Burnett Awards for the Sacramento History Alliance, in which legacy businesses more than 50 plus years old are honored. She recently received a grant to tell the history of Sacramento's public and farmers markets, and has barely begun interviewing the people behind the stories. So now on to you, Mary Ellen.
Thank you so much, Kelsey. And I am going to introduce Joni. And Joni, can you just say hello now? Or not. Anyway, Joni Titherington is joining me for this evening. She's going to talk about what's happening now. I'm going to do things that are more historical. I will say that both of our stories are going to be personal stories. I know Joni from all over. I first met her when Produce Express was doing farm tours using their buses. We met, we connected. She's also a member of Le Damascafier, which is a philanthropic organization for women in food, agriculture, and hospitality. She is also, and some of this, she might not be still, Oak Park, she was with the Oak Park Neighborhood Association and with the Oak Park Farmers Market, and I believe with Davis. She will correct all of this later when it's time for her to talk. And I will also mention that neither of us are going to be using slideshows today, even though I have slides available. I might go ahead and put those as a PDF and send them to everyone who signed up. So, according to legends from Native American tribes of the Sacramento Valley, a spirit dived into the Sacramento River, brought up a handful of earth, and used the soil to create the world. That might be a myth or an apocryphal story, but those who have worked it throughout the area's history created an incredibly diverse food scene from the very beginning of our origins. Most of you are here locally through the Renaissance Society and will know the name John Sutter. He came here for the rich agricultural bounty. The town's upriver where Hop Farm was, near modern-day Marysville, and lands just south of the city off of what is now Broadway, heading out towards Riverside, Lower Stockton, and Upper Stockton Boulevard, and Delta towns were farm trade centers that boasted of rich cropland and productive sites for orchards and cattle grazing. Even Sacramento, which was the largest city, has an agricultural tradition as a major food processing center. The core city has a rich river and rich cropland. Even today, agriculture has significant economic presence in the region. It's related to about 6% of the region's income and employment. Leading commodities have always been, and it has never wavered since Sutter first started, wine grapes. After that, the commodities shift a little bit, whether it's rice or milk, poultry, livestock, fruits, nuts, vegetables, and nursery products. The gross value of all agricultural products in Sacramento County was a little more than 460 million in 2019. Now, this is a story that I didn't really discover until I started a special events and catering firm in 1980. When I was a kid growing up in the 50s and early 60s, I was born in 1951. Like many of you, I truly believed that vegetables grew in cans. The only fresh vegetables I remember was my mother's overcooked broccoli and cauliflower that suffered through at least 30 minutes of boiling before being served gray and tasteless, and very occasionally fresh corn on the cob or frozen peas. I'm hoping that Joni had a much better diet than I had, unless of course it was carrots and potatoes served in a stew. To this day, I still can't eat lima beans, canned lima beans, of course, which was our fallback vegetable. My father's salads were wilted affairs with iceberg lettuce and maybe some radishes or carrots or green onion, celery, and a vinegar and oil dressing. He called them wet salads. He put on so much dressing that they literally just wilted under the weight. Occasionally, my mother would make a salad dressing using Good Seasons dressing in a jar, 10 cents a pack, tear it in, add some oil and vinegar, and voila. Or she would add some ketchup to mayonnaise for Thousand Island dressing. So you might be surprised to know that my favorite thing to search while traveling is farmers and public markets, both those indoors and those in elaborate buildings like the Reading Terminal Market in Philadelphia, Pike's Place Market in Seattle, the Faneuil Market in Boston, markets through Baltimore, Paris, Lyon, France, Savannah, Georgia, Maine, Vancouver Island, and anywhere where there are markets in America or the streets of Europe and England. I grew up in Sacramento in a place called New Helvetia, and that was public housing, which was within walking distance of the Sacramento Farmers Market between 3rd and 5th Streets. Now that was an industrial area with other food processing facilities. We would head over there to play often. I remember the Chinese women in our neighborhood, and we had a very multicultural neighborhood, would go over and select live chickens at the poultry market around 5th and Broadway. You would hear them cluck and also hear the sound when they would whirl them around to break their necks. They would start to pluck the feathers literally while walking home, and all of us kids would follow behind them and pick up the feathers. There were also fish processing places close by, and that would often make me retch, but I loved watching the constant flow of trucks driving up and men loading vegetables into them at the market itself. New Helvetia and nearby Southside Park was one of the few places in the city that was fully integrated, thanks to Nate Colley, Sacramento's first Black lawyer, who had fought for desegregation in 1952. It was built to house workers for the war industry and housed many returning vets from Korea. Many found it very difficult to find full-time work when they came back, either because they suffered from PTSD or jobs just weren't available. Many of the men and most of the women worked seasonally for the canneries. Maybe because of that, that's why we ate canned food. It was cheap, if not particularly good. Fresh vegetables especially could be quite expensive when I was growing up. I can even remember the summer months when you would think that fresh vegetables were plentiful, and the woman would buy lugs of them at the ranch stands that could still be found throughout the city, especially in Oak Park and down in the Delta. On a weekend, hundreds of pounds would be processed in big vats in our backyard and put into mason jars to be used all winter. I literally don't remember ever eating them fresh. The only person who really made fresh vegetables was our next door neighbor, Mrs. G. She and her husband had a store at 13th and W Street that had a smattering of fresh vegetables for stir fry, plus many exotic things that were dried and in packages with really pungent smells. Fruit, however, was a different matter. We were poor, but my father would invest in good quality fruit and prime meat when it was available. purchased often at the public market on 13th and J Street. And I don't know if many of you know that building. We'll talk about it more. And later at Jim Denio's auction and farmers market in Roseville. My father had grown up riding the rails across America, mostly eating bruised and spoiled fruit and meat. He would bring real coffee with him. And the only reason that he didn't suffer from malnutrition was that he would find Black sharecroppers or find hobo signs where Jews were and be able to trade off the coffee for food. Later in life, he vowed that even though we were poor, he would buy the best that he could afford, even if that meant small quantities of either. So as I said, one of his favorite places to go was the Sacramento Public Market at 13th and J Streets. He liked having breakfast at a place called Thaler's Coffee Shop and would occasionally take me there. What I remember about the public market was that they had the sounds of 5,000 chickens at any time that were on the roof, and you would hear them clucking. Sometimes they would process 5,000 chickens in a day. Our life really seemed to turn around a little when we started going to Denio's auction in Roseville every Saturday, and later the Sacramento Free Farmers Market on 30th and S Street. However, I didn't really begin to appreciate fresh fruit and vegetables until I began catering in the early 80s. My specialty, along with a woman by the name of Gloria Burt, some of you might know her from Roar Avis Art Gallery and KVIE, would highlight the bounty of everything Sacramento had to offer. That was really my first experience with the farmers certified market under the freeway at 6th Street, although it was easier for me to purchase everything from either Cordy Brothers, where a dear friend, George Okino, was the produce manager, or Taylor's Market, who served Aki's Ranch vegetables. However, I'm really getting ahead of myself. While investigating the history of farmers market in Sacramento, I was surprised to find that there is a period in our history where farmers markets were extremely rare. In 1948, when the USDA conducted their first agricultural census, there were only around 100 farmers markets in the entire country. Only 6 in California, and one of those was in Sacramento, the public market. The first farmers markets of record were opened during the colonial era: Boston in 1634, Hartford 1643, New York City 1686, and Philadelphia in 1693. I have visited all of them. In those early days of our history, farmers markets were really the primary venue for access to fresh vegetables and fruits. But as cities grew in size and density, farmland was pushed further and further from the urban centers. Innovations in transportation and cold storage allowed farmers to ship their produce in larger quantities over longer distances. It's easy for us in Sacramento to believe that we were the epicenter of that, but that's not true. Almost every city's history surrounded the rail yards. The first age of farmers markets was on the decline as the corner grocer replaced the farm stand as the primary source for produce. Again, as I mentioned, we begin with John Sutter, who had always planned on coming to this region to start an agricultural utopia, highlighting livestock, grapes, wheat, and fresh vegetables and fruit. He had farm stands and a store at Sutter's Fort. In 1841, he purchased Fort Ross, which at the time had a little over 250 varieties of fruits and vegetables that grew uniquely to California. He purchased the seeds and took many of them to Hawk Farm to propagate them. I will mention that if you go to Fort Ross, they have been able to save those seeds, or many of them, almost 3/4 of them or more, and be able to replicate it so that we are now eating some of the same things that they produced in 1841, including Sonoran wheat, which we can get from the Capay Valley. By 1857, there was a public market that was mostly short-lived. Most of the farmers actually vended their wares at a spot near 3rd and J Street for generations. There were over 95 or so a day would drive into the city. Many of them would drive in from where I lived, New Helvetia, where their truck farms were. and they would sell from about 7 to noon every day. One of the things that racism has always reared its ugly head, I'll tell that story more and more. There was a fight. One of the reasons why they wanted to have a public market for the city was so that they could divide the Chinese and the Japanese from white and not so white, as they referred to them, farmers. Another public market started later at 915 J Street, and there was a Columbia General Market at 7th that eventually folded into that J Street market. Literally from 1870 until 1923, every few years, the city fathers or the Grange or an improvement society would propose a public market. There weren't public markets in San Francisco either, and so it was literally a straight state wide effort to try to be able to get them in different cities. They would propose it. They would always say it would cost $50,000. They would find a location, something would happen so that it wouldn't happen. Ideas were floated and floated again, but it never came to fruition. In 1921, and I'm hoping that Joni knows more about this, a farmer's market began in Oak Park and another at 9th and S Streets. Neither one of those allowed people of color to sell their wares there. And I want to reiterate what people of color meant. It meant not only Black, Chinese, and Japanese, but Portuguese, Italians, and Irish, or especially Black Irish. So if you were not part of the mainstream white, you literally couldn't sell there. In fact, in the neighborhood that I live in right now, which is 23rd and T, there were smell ordinances to dissuade people of Portuguese or Italian descent to make their own wine or beer or process their own tomatoes for sauce. Finally, in 1923, Lizzie Glide, you'll recognize her from Glide Church in San Francisco, and also the aunt of Mimi Miller, who is someone you should know more about, hired Julia Morgan to build a public market at 13th and J. It had only 24 vendors, and of those, only 4 sold fresh fruits and vegetables. Most people still purchased directly from the market or from vendors that drove wagons down each street. Remember that in Sacramento until 1911, when Oak Park began and was brought into the city, literally the whole city ended at what is now Alhambra Boulevard. It was really state of the art with walk-in refrigerators to store produce, and was kept cool on the stand by using wet burlap sacks under various greens, carrots, beans, beets, etc. The bananas came in large wooden tubs that were still on their original stalks, which were hung on hooks. The customer did not handle the produce. You asked, and the farmers packaged it for you. And I can remember ordering just a single banana sometimes, and sometimes ones at the very, very top. By 1940, the public market had a meat stand, a poultry handler. As I'd said before, live chickens were slaughtered and cleaned on site. 3 delis. One, Henderson's, featured a place where you could get buttermilk for 5 cents a glass, and a bakery owned by Carl Jungle, who was a Norwegian whose salt rising bread smelled like dirty socks, says Sam Camillus, who I interviewed some years back for a story about the public market when it was baking, but it really tasted very good. There was also the Wiggly Piggly, cranberries, bakeries, and all called the public market home. The Wiggly Piggly also had a place in Oak Park. Like many farmers markets, it had its heyday. White flight from the city and more businesses moved to the suburbs helped seal its fate. Afterwards, the red structure was an office building where tenants included the California Secretary of State. And for the past years, you'll remember it as the restored facade has been the Sheraton Grand Sacramento, which is a 26-story hotel across from the Sacramento Convention Center. In 1923, a wholesale market began on 16th Street as well. It was the site of the start of General Produce that was owned by the Wong family and later Produce Express. Produce Express, I can highly recommend to this day. They are doing wonderful work with donations to the Associated Students Food Pantry. They later moved over to the place on 33rd Street. It was really a large industrial area that catered to small groceries that served every neighborhood. If Kelsey and I live in Midtown, and we can tell you that they're still there. It was not unusual to have a small market, a butcher shop, or a green grocer within 5 blocks of any house. And some of those groceries still exist today. There were also markets out in North Sacramento. The Homey Produce Market was at 1512 Del Paso Boulevard, and it also began about the same time. In 1933, tired of being shut out of the other markets, a collaboration began between the Chinese, Japanese, Portuguese, Italian farmers, and others to begin a wholesale produce market between 3rd and 5th near Broadway. There were over 275 farmers in all. At the same time, the Market Club, one of my favorite lost eateries, opened. At the same time, Sacramento ranked as the 2nd largest county in the nation in amount of acreage planted for vegetables. The advantage of the market is that it was adjacent to rail lines, so they could also pack directly for sale and to markets south and east. The local real estate company right in Kimbrough, that really deserves a talk on its own, was the real estate agency and developer for both facilities. Most of those spaces were created during the height of the Depression. There was a concern that food distribution inefficiencies and a more community-based solution would provide Sacramentans with access to produce at more affordable price in the grocery stores, which were able to also offer fresher quality. So farmers markets became a legitimate part of the city's food distribution system, which brought their supporters into conflict with the wholesale produce merchants and the Retail Grocers Association. That's a story I could tell by itself. That market proved its worth by using its facilities to save surplus crops that would have gone to waste. So of those 275 farmers, most of them were truck farmers that literally didn't produce enough to be able to sell their wares to the large processing plants and canneries. Then, as of now, 90% of all the fruits and vegetables grown in Sacramento County went directly to canneries and processing, and only 2% actually went directly to the consumer. Most of the people actually worked on consignment, so it wasn't even like you could sell directly. They could actually bring, like bread, fruits and vegetables back if they didn't sell. It was 1937 when the Sacramento Free Market began. Farmers would huddle around that. That was different sites, mostly 30th and S. Sometimes it's referred as P and Q streets. But farmers would huddle around smudge pots in open sheds, selling everything from garden produce to live chickens, rabbits, and freshly made cheese. By the time we started going to it, which was sometime in the probably mid-60s, the sheds had been enclosed. Later, they would add air conditioning, but I can remember once being near a fishmonger, and the ice was starting to melt, and it ran through my shoes and was horrible, I have to say. Later, vendors would also sell antique shoes and various knickknacks. Groups like the AAUW would have book sales, and a lot of the nonprofits would use it as well. But you went there for, again, fresh fruits and vegetables. The prime times were really 7 a.m. to 2 o'clock. Jim Denio's Roseville's Farmer Market and Auction was located, and still, I believe, at 98 Atkinson Roseville. And it was another place to find fruits, vegetables, meats, and poultry, as well as flea market items of almost every description. In sometime during the 50s, the second Jim Boys opened up there. And I can still remember working in a stall and being able to go off and get fresh fruits, fresh vegetables, and a taco, 2 tacos for 25 cents, and the grease would run down my arm. One of the things that you could also buy there was firewood, compost, wines, vinegars, plants, flowers, worms, pigs, goats, and jerky. I ended up raising rabbits for a short time. We lived over on 65th Street by that time. And it was time for me to sell them. And I took them out to Jim Denio's. I was really excited because I got $3 per rabbit, which was $36. And all I could think of was all the wonderful stuff I wanted to buy with it. And I'm flashing my money. And I can remember my father saying, you realize, of course, that those rabbits are not going to be pets. They're going to be in the stew pot tonight. And I haven't eaten rabbit since. So across the country, farmers markets have continued to gain in popularity since the 1970s and the rise of the slow food movement. Both Joni and Kelsey and I are slow food members. According to the Department of Agriculture, there are now more than, and I'm sure it's, this figure is probably off because of COVID, there are more than 8,700 farmers markets operating in the United States from 100 in 1948. These markets are continuing to gain popularity as they have reached another niche in the market by becoming incubators for small businesses. If you go out to any of the farmers markets today, and Joni's going to talk about it, you can buy not only fresh fruits and vegetables and flowers, but finished product as well. And you can do that without having to start up and to invest in a traditional brand or a brick and mortar store. So cottage food producers can work to build their brand and their customer base by sharing their stories with market goers and start getting sustainability in the early stages of their business development. This history of small business incubation is not a completely new role for farmers markets. And now I'm going to turn you over to Joni, who's going to tell you her story of the certified markets and more. And then afterwards, we're going to talk about where the trend is following. So Joni, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I just want to say thank you for everyone for showing up this evening. My story is a pretty short story. I've only been, my degree's in criminal justice. So I'll backtrack and get us to where we are today in farmers markets. So I was the president of the Oak Park Neighborhood Association, and I became that because my family has been deeply rooted in Sacramento for a very long time. Although I have not been in Sacramento as long as my family has been here. I was born in Southern California in Big Bear to an impoverished white family. I'm the only one that looks like me in my family. So I'm literally the black sheep of the family. We were very, very poor. And we had to eat commodities. So we ate the government cheese. And Mary Ellen, I can't eat canned peas to this day. I can eat fresh peas now. But this was during a time when people really were shifting their gears and really started, like in the 50s, started eating TV dinners because it was quick. Family had a lot of work to do. Moms were coming back from working during the wars. And there was still more stuff to be done. So household incomes were starting to become 2-income households to make ends meet. So folks were eating fast foods like McDonald's. I died when we would go on a Sunday afternoon and I could share a Big Mac with my sister Naji and have some fries with that and share a milkshake. That was the highlight. And it was really encouraged that this food was wholesome and healthy. And if we fast forward, I did eat a lot of TV dinners, a lot of frozen pizzas, Twinkies, ding dongs, all of that prepackaged, pre-made, over-processed food. And I didn't learn my lesson early, even though as a child, we ate really well. We grew our own food because we were poor. We lived in Big Bear, California, and moved to Northern California. Maybe some of you are familiar with Forest Hill. And that's where we really thrived. I ate frog, I ate rabbit, we ate venison, we grew our own corn, we had our own chickens, our own goats, and we drank goat's milk. And that is another thing that is my kryptonite. I really do not like goat's milk to this day. I can eat a little bit of goat cheese because that's delicious and you can add stuff to it. And then we basically moved to the city because that's where the work was for my mom. She was a single mom with 6 kids. And some of my older siblings were growing up and moving out, going into the Navy, moving out, working in the oil fields in the southern states. And so as we shrunk, mom cooked less and worked more. So there was a lot of processed food that our family consumed. As we got older, in particular in high school, I was in an ag program, and I actually became a vegetarian for a short period of time, and because we visited where they were slaughtering, processing cows and pigs, and it was just a horrifying sight for me to see. So I really started paying attention to what I was starting to consume in my body, and I wanted to be a little bit healthier. And we fast forward here in Sacramento, and there really were only a few farmers markets a few years ago. Well, more than a few, probably about 12 years ago, really wasn't a lot of farmers markets. And I was the president of the neighborhood association, and we did an audit of what the community's needs were. And we had one grocery store for nearly 20,000 people. And there are a lot of corner stores. Marianne talked about corner stores being that place where you can get fresh fruits and vegetables. At this time, what was selling at the corner stores was potato chips, beer, cigarettes, sometimes hard alcohol. You would find a potato or two, but you really didn't know how old it was. And occasionally you would see a banana and you knew it wasn't good because it was just almost brown. And that was where, folks were shopping to get their, their Wonder Bread or Rainbow Bread because it was inexpensive and convenient, to get a little bit of milk. But the kids would go there for candy and potato chips and soda pop. And we looked at what was happening in our community, and a report came out that the morbidity rates in the county of Sacramento for children were exponentially higher than anywhere else in the state or the nation, for a couple of reasons, and mostly around resources. And one of those resources is food access. But the main farmers market that most folks went to was the Central Farmers Market, which is under the freeway at Fifth Street. And that was the main place to go. There were a few other smaller markets at Sunrise, and there were more cropping up here and there. A few cropped up at after they built the light rail stations, things like that. And there were a lot of failed farmers markets as well, where communities were really trying, like in Del Paso Heights, to have better food access. Because they were considered food deserts, just like Oak Park, meaning that per capita, there were more corner stores and fast food restaurants than there was grocery stores where healthy fruits and vegetables could be purchased. And we fast forward a little more, and farmers markets started to shift a little bit, and the main focus not necessarily was food. It was more of a combination between a maker's market and a farmer's market, where you'd have a few farmers and food producers, but mostly folks selling T-shirts and baskets and earrings and things like that. And if we get to current day, we have a whole lot of farmers markets, but we still have some farmers markets that are very successful and well known, and others that are upstarts and they're here and gone in a short period of time. The Oak Park Farmers Market was a market that we started 12 years ago because there wasn't access to food. And in Oak Park, we're actually considered a food desert because the only grocery store that we had in Oak Park closed. Food Source closed right before the shutdown last year. So no one had access to healthy fruits and vegetables. We still have quite a few folks that can't get to farmers markets or get to other markets without taking 3 buses and it taking 2 hours to travel 3 miles to get to the grocery store. Or they're having to bike, and that's quite a challenge when you're a single mother and have toddlers in your house. And so having food access in the area was really important for the community as a whole. And we just had a lot of different types, but we do have some old school holdouts like Dan Best's markets. He really does try to focus not on makers, but on the farmers and the food producers. And it's very correct in saying that these are testing grounds for small food businesses that may start out with their cottage food permit and want to get to the point to build their brand and their products in order to get into a brick and mortar. A great example of that would be Maza Hummus. He started in his home with a cottage food permit, moved to his garage where he bought some commercial equipment. Now he actually has a facility and delivers to places like Rayleigh's and Nugget Markets and Cordy Brothers and places like that that are high-end markets here in the area and sell his hummus. Another great example of someone that really started modest in his kitchen was Faria Bakery. Chris really worked really hard. He had a stellar product. And I wouldn't let him in my market because I already had a baker and I'm like, I don't want to split their profits. And so no one's making money. And then we opened an additional market at UC Davis Health. And he actually, I said, yes, I have room. Please come. I kick myself in the butt all the time. His product is so stellar, high end. It really does resemble French baked goods. And he's got a great flavor profile. He now has a spot in Oak Park in a prime area on Broadway in the Triangle area, and he has a line out the door. So it's really developed, and we have other folks that are that come in through Alchemist, who has a food business incubator program, and work with us as well. And they work with the Midtown Farmers Market and really giving these small businesses an opportunity. And then COVID hit, so it was really difficult. Many markets closed during this last year due to the facilities that they were operating out of, mainly hospitals like UC Davis Health, Sutter Health, and several others where they just weren't allowed to operate on the premises. And a lot of farmers, a lot of small farmers had to shift gears because they could no longer sell their product to restaurants that weren't able to purchase their product. So there was a shifting of gears yet again with the restaurants finding ways to be able to stay open and provide food. And I think some of you might know about the Great Plates program. And we worked with the city and the state to get funding from the CARES Act to be able to support feeding seniors that were marginalized. So that was really the hard part of being able to keep farmers markets open, is having farmers still growing while also producing for these large food delivery programs. We couldn't keep food on our tables. at our farmers markets. And on top of it, we had to shift gears to ensure all our customers were safe. In fact, we didn't even know if we were going to be able to operate farmers markets until the CDFA, California Department of Food and Agriculture, had deemed all of the farmers markets in the state an essential point of access for food. So we had to get portable hand washing stations. We provided masks. We had to hire additional staff to ensure that customers weren't touching the farmers' food, so there wasn't any cross-contamination going on. So we worked really hard to ensure, and other farmers markets worked really hard to make sure that everybody felt safe where they were at. And we jump into this year, and lots of things have changed. There's been a lot of city changes, and so the Sunday Central Market, the largest market in the region, where you can find at least 22,000 people strolling through that market at any given time, actually have to move where they were at. They're now at Arden Fair in the first back parking lot, but they really are in a great space because that is a food desert as well. And they have a great turnout happening, but they've lost many of their customers that bike and walk to the market. So we've had to kind of fill some of that space, the Midtown Farmers Market and the Oak Park Farmers Market, in order to ensure that people have a safe, a comfortable place to shop for food and be able to have access to food, essentially. And that kind of winds up everything that I have to say. So I'm going to pass that back to Mary Ellen.
Thank you, Joni. I have a couple of questions for you, and then Kelsey is also going to watch people's hands, but I'm going to ask the first one, which is to me really obvious, and that is the farmers markets when we were kids were where you got vegetables that cost less than anything you got in the supermarket. The market that I was talking about at 33rd Street, even on 5th Street, even though that was a wholesale market, one of the wonderful things is there was always bruised fruits and vegetables. So we were very poor growing up as well. You could go over, and if a watermelon, like cracked, they would give you the watermelons. You could pick up bruised fruit literally for nothing. If it didn't sell, they would give it to people in the neighborhood. At some point, when I look at the market at 6th under the freeway, the main one that has just moved, I know that even though it's got a lot of organic, I prefer going to what I used to call the Renegade Market. That's on Broadway itself, that is almost all Southeast Asian folks, whether they're from Thailand or Vietnam or India. And I also noticed that that's where most of the chefs are every week. So can you talk a little bit about cost versus being able to really provide food so that we don't have these food deserts and people can actually afford to purchase there?
And that is a really
may I just ask a question? Where was that you were just talking of, the Asian market?
It's at 5th and Broadway.
5th and Broadway, thank you.
Right. And it is still, Joni, is it still going on?
No,
sure.
I haven't seen it,
Okay.
but it may be opening up soon. I don't know. But that really is a renegade market. So the difference is if you're a certified farmers market, that means all of your growers and producers are certified. So this could be folks that are purchasing from farmers and reselling it, but many of those farmers are Hmong and Mien. There are others as well, but the vast majority are Hmong and Mien vendors, and they grow in their backyards, and they actually grow in empty lots as well, and they sell that produce. So their costs are a little bit less because they don't have to hold $1 million worth of insurance. They don't have to pay really much of a vendor fee and all of the other costs. They do incur the cost of water, seed, and their time. So it's a little bit cheaper. But I have seen the price at conventional certified farmers markets be a lot more. And I'll tell you why a little bit of the prices are a little more expensive there. It's basically because the vendor fees have gone up. Ours are still very reasonable. They're $15 a week. We're going to keep them there. We get grant funding to pay for staffing time. So we aren't going to try to undercut our farmers. They only make a 3% profit margin. If you're the Piggly Wiggly, that's perfectly fine because you sell a lot of different things and you sell a lot of it. Small farmers don't. They have to go to a lot of farmers markets to really make ends meet. So that's one reason. Fuel prices can play a role in that, but last year that shouldn't have been an issue. A lot of farmers don't own their land anymore. They lease it. Some, if they're in the city proper or in the county, they're actually on municipal water. So they're paying per square, footage for their water. So there are a lot of additional costs, and they're growing commercial. They have insurance for their cars. They have the seed. They have, the irrigation tape or some sort of means of irrigating. And they normally, if they're larger scaled farmers market or farmer, they actually have to pay for staff. So there are additional costs where these smaller farmers don't incur those costs. So the produce is a little more expensive. Personally, I'm going to say this in public. I think, organic is a sham. If you look at the approved list of pesticides and herbicides, some of them are still petroleum based. So that's a sham. A lot of folks got into it because they saw that they could monetize it and make it more expensive. You can get a same quality from someone that doesn't use any pesticides at all. Like, for example, Route 64 farm, which is a high impact urban farm right in Tahoe Park, that has a farm stand. They don't use pesticides. They don't use herbicides. All of their stuff is all naturally produced. They gather waste from restaurants to make soil and compost, and they do it very well. And places like where Route 64 was, is Heavy Dirt Farm, is Fire Clay Farm. It's a chef, very mindful about what he's growing because he wants to cater to chefs as well. He doesn't charge a huge price for his product, but his product is a stellar product. And you're getting the same quality, and he's not incurring all of the costs that it takes to actually become certified organic. So I'll leave it there.
So we have one question that I'm going to have Kelsey take a look at it, but I have a couple of questions for you too. And that is, somebody asked where the first farmer's market was in Oak Park, and it was on 35th Street. Now, when I was a kid, my father had a store in Oak Park for a very short period of time that was also on 35th Street. And I can't imagine what would have been open space at that time. Do you know where that was located? Would it have been at McClatchy Park? And can you tell us where the Oak Park Farmers Market is now?
Certainly. The quick answer is I don't know exactly where on 35th it was. I went through some photographs of the family and I couldn't find it. And that I really wanted to show people where it was at. And I couldn't find any pictures. I know where the main store was on 35th or 34th Street. There, we have pictures of that. But that didn't really show it where it was. The meat market that my great aunt worked at was on 35th Street as well. So I'm assuming it might have been somewhere near in between Made Right and that place, because the what now is the Triangle District right there that they built out, that was the Goodwill store. There wasn't anything there either until probably the 50s or 60s. The Oak Park Farmers Market is located at 3500 Fifth Avenue, which is the beautiful McClatchy Park. And it is a fantastic actual canvas to actually have a farmer's market at. The park is so beautiful, full of trees, all sorts of activities for families to come and do and shop and go home, or shop first, go home, and then come back and enjoy the space.
All right, and then again, I have a couple of questions for you, and then I'm going to ask Kelsey to have people do their hands up and they can unmute themselves and ask a question. But I am going to, I'm going to define the difference between a public market and a farmer's market, and you correct me. And that is that the rationale for public markets is that public markets, like the one that was at 13th and J Street, were not meant as purely just farmers markets. They were also small stores. Again, it was kind of that cottage industry. There's a big move towards having a public market in Sacramento. We didn't talk about that much. Andrea Lepore and I'm blanking on her partner are actually thinking of taking what was the Market Club. There's only one produce stand that's left out of that whole acreage, and putting a farmer's market into that space. They've talked about other places in town as well. As they talked about having one at the depot, the railroad depot, and others, but they're really meant as tourists. Can you add anything more about the difference between a farmer's market and a public market?
Certainly, those are the public market are basically permanent stalls that you rent.
Right.
And at a farmer's market, they are temporary. So you put your canopy up, you offload all of your product, make it look beautiful. When the market is over, you take all of your stuff out and you move along. Sometimes the public markets have cold storage. They have electricity. A great example is Seattle. If you've ever been to that market, it is absolutely gorgeous. Love it. And they're not necessarily certified producers that are in there. I would consider Denio's now a public market, right, because they can basically they're reselling produce that trucks come, they haggle for the price that they're going to buy it for, they mark it up and they resell it. Also, they have permanent stalls there that have been there for 30 years.
Right.
And I can remember our Saturdays at Denio's as well. For me, it wasn't the taco, it was the corn dog.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And marguerites. I don't know if marguerites was incredible. When I was a kid, it would be ice. You'd get there at 6 o'clock in the morning and you get 2 eggs and bacon, and it would congeal. The butter would congeal. It was wonderful. I am going to ask you one more question while waiting for other people. Then I'm going to turn it over to Kelsey to field some questions. Has the 99-cent store, where people can now get fruits and vegetables pretty cheap and other food, has it replaced in some areas the farmer's market?
I don't believe so. I couldn't say for certain because we haven't done any research in regards to that, but I don't think so. I think folks go there, they do a couple of tries and they go, oh, this isn't what I'm looking for. Some people, it's just where they have to shop because of budgetary constraints. But I don't think it has replaced any farmers markets.
And Kelsey, I do have one more question, I'm sorry. And then we'll open it up to everybody else, really. And that is going to be the rise of urban farms in Sacramento. And we had them. Where I live at 23rd Street, Cox Farm, it still had farms. When I was in Oak Park, there were still farms in Oak Park. There were still farms, working farms, literally when I lived on 65th Street. But can you talk, then they went away. Can you talk a little bit about the urban farm movement?
Sure. This is really a hot movement across the nation. You look at Detroit, and they've really taken these very large lots where there had been mansions and they've been tore down, and they're actually growing food to actually resell at grocery stores, small corner stores. They're doing farm stands, and it's a much more efficient way to grow in the city. And if you really get a real urban farm, they are actually a production farm. So they're thinking about their soil science, they're thinking about their irrigation, they're thinking about their crop rotation, and their seasonality. And that's really important. A great example, I cannot tell you, a great example really is Route 64 Farm. I'm hoping to do some farm visit videos. We actually got a little bit of a grant to do some farm tours. We can't do them in person still. We were going to do bus tours, so we're going to have to do some video tours. But I would love to be able to share that later on with you, so you have an example of really what some of these farms are doing and the fact that they're high impact. So they're planting in between rows. They're doing some very, it's permaculture, really, what they're doing within their space that they're growing. And normally these urban farms are between 1 and 2 acres only. So it's someone that's finding a lot that is 1.5 acres or 2 acres that has a home on it. They live there. There's no fuel cost for them. There's very little, it goes on their homeowner's insurance. So there's very little risk for them as well. And there's a higher margin of profit as well.
Great, thank you. I'm going to throw this over to Kelsey to moderate and to encourage people to raise their hands and ask more questions or share information that you've got. Kelsey?
Yeah, so if anyone else has any questions, please raise your hand. We can make sure that you're unmuted, and if you want to share your video, we can help you with that as well. Let's see. Oh, hey there. Do you have a question?
Who did we have that had their hand raised?
L. Brownston at AOL.com. We don't have
Yes.
your first and last name.
Larry Brownston. I remember
Okay, Larry.
I remember the farmers market, the public market on 13th and J Street. A neighbor used to take me there, and the other farmers market underneath the freeway. That neither one of them are not there anymore. They're not around anymore. Now we got these local public farmers markets. One of them at a country club center.
And I have to tell you, I go to farmers markets all over. We have markets, and if anybody can add them, we have markets in Folsom, in Elk Grove. I was going to ask Tom. Tom, can you talk about the Delta at all, and some of the farm stands and the farm trails that we can take, and you pick it? Would you mind joining us? Tom, are you still with us? All right, we're going to go with Kathy H.
I just wanted to share that someone had asked for a list of the local farmers markets. And so she asked if there was a list online. So I Googled it, and I went ahead and put in chat a list of the local farmers market for the greater Sacramento area and the days that they operate.
Good.
Kathy, is this current COVID restriction?
Oh, we're going to go with Marcia first, and then Michelle will get to your question.
Yeah, I was going to ask, is this very recent, this list? So it has all the COVID restrictions?
You'd have to look at it. I don't know.
Okay, thank you.
You can actually Google, and you can find several lists. You can find several lists where they are. But there are a lot of, I'm getting a little bit of feedback from someone else. But There are a lot of different lists out there, and there are a lot of U-Pick now. So they have U-Pick trails. There are Placer. If you go to Placer County Grow, you can actually find some trails where you can actually do the citrus, the stone fruit, visit Twin Peaks orchards, and many others that are in Placer County.
There's also the Delta Trails. And I apologize. Somebody else, Michelle, are you on? Could you mute for just a second? Thank you. The Delta Farm Trails, we lost Tom. There are actually, again, spaces of all of the places that are still open. And I really recommend that people try those as the same way. I'm going to mute myself so Michelle can ask or talk.
Oh, hi. Are there any plans or push to have a grocery store back in Oak Park?
Yes, there is. I am happy to report that there will be a a store in Oak Park at the old food source site. They've taken the whole site. We had a really difficult time. It will be a Hispanic market similar to La Superior, with the meat counters, with the seasoned meat, as well as their deli counters. And I'm really excited. This is an employee-owned business. They're not unionized, but they own the business. So we're really excited to welcome them in the fall. But in the meantime, we still need to feed our community.
Good. And again, one question, and then what I'm going to suggest is that people get really shy, Joni. And so what they love is for us to do a firm, we stop recording and then allow people to talk afterwards. So we kind of go into what we call the green room. So, but I'm going to ask again, what do you think the chances of that Sacramento, which is supposedly the farm to fork capital of the country, will actually get its what together to have a public market? We lost the market down in Old Sacramento. That didn't work. A lot of these efforts have kind of not, come to fruition. What do you think the chances of us actually putting that together?
That is a big ask. And just in order to get the space, you need a minimum of $1 million of working funds. So it really would take the dedication of a public-private partnership to actually make that happen. And I don't think that's there. I think folks are really looking towards having a privately owned public market.
Good. All right. So what I'm going to suggest, I'm going to throw it over to Kathy. Kathy, can you do our little plea if you're not a member of Renaissance, plea?
Yes, I want to just share with folks a couple of upcoming events that Renaissance with in partnership with various community partners that we have coming up in the next week. So I've put them in chat. The first one that I listed is tomorrow night, the place called Junction, Early Roseville History. I've heard this speaker before. She's excellent. That'll be tomorrow night at 7. The registration link is in chat. If you just copy and paste that into your URL, it will take you right to registration. You'll get all the Zoom information. The second one that I've listed is Food in Space. Talk about as different from a farmer's market as you can get, but still very fascinating. Another great speaker. And then I think I listed the YouTube channel. Yes, previously recorded videos that Renaissance and various partners host have been listed on and posted on our YouTube channel. So I've listed 3 links just to try to encourage you, learn more. Renaissance is all about lifelong learning. And really, we just want to give back to our community, especially during the pandemic time of trying to offer different classes or different events online that people find interesting. So thanks so much for joining us. And do you want me to turn off the video? I mean, the recording, Mary Ellen?
Yes. I want to thank Joni Tither